All right, welcome. Today, we are tackling a fascinating and, let's be honest, a kind of counterintuitive idea. We're going to talk about engineering your own income stream using one of the most talked about, most volatile assets on the market.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? Can you actually generate predictable income from one of the most unpredictable assets on the planet? I mean, the whole idea of predictable income and Bitcoin just feels wrong together. They seem like complete opposites. But what if there's a disciplined, systematic way to make it work?
Well, the key is a pretty fundamental shift in how you think about all this. You see, traditional income investing is all about hunting for yield, right? You're looking at bonds, dividend stocks, that kind of thing. This new approach, though, it's completely different. It's about harvesting growth from assets that are designed to appreciate in value. It is a totally different risk profile, and believe me, it requires a different mindset.
Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to break this whole thing down into 5 parts. First, we'll get right into that core contradiction. Then, we'll talk about the new mindset you're going to need. After that, we'll lay out the practical, do-it-yourself blueprint. Then, and this is a big one, we'll talk about managing that infamous volatility. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a total return toolkit.
So, Section 1, the income contradiction. Why on earth would you even think about putting a high-growth asset that pays 0 dividends, like IBIT, the iShares Bitcoin Trust, into an income portfolio? Well, the answer is simple. Its value isn't in what it pays you, but in its potential to grow.
And this brings us to this really core concept, total return investing. This is a strategy where you just stop thinking about your investments in separate buckets, like income over here and growth over there. Instead, you look at your entire portfolio's total growth, everything, appreciation, dividends, interest, as one big pool of money that you can use to meet your cash needs.
And that leads you to ask this question. This is what a total return investor asks. It's a huge shift from where can I find some yield to how can I sustainably harvest my portfolio's total growth. See how that reframes everything? It changes the job description for every single asset in your portfolio.
And this all leads to a really cool goal, creating what's called a synthetic dividend. Since IBIT doesn't pay you a dividend, you're going to engineer your own. And you do this by systematically, and that's the key word, systematically selling off small pieces of your shares after they've grown, creating your own cash flow. You're basically turning your capital gains into a self-directed income stream.
All right, on to our second section, a new mindset. This is all about making that leap from being a passive yield hunter to becoming an active growth harvester. And in this model, an asset like IBIT really acts like a growth spark plug for your whole portfolio.
So how do you put this mindset into practice? Well, it's a pretty straightforward 3-step blueprint. And this isn't about guesswork or trying to time the market. Nope, it's about following a system. It all starts with proper position sizing, then it moves to a disciplined way of harvesting your gains, and then, for the more advanced folks, there's even an optional layer of using options to generate more income. Which brings us right to the how-to part. Section 3, the DIY blueprint. Now, the most important thing to get here is that this is not about feelings or what you think the market's going to do next. It is a rules-based system for engineering that income we've been talking about.
Now, what's really interesting when you look at this is just how small the recommended IBIT allocation is. We're talking for a moderate investor, maybe 3 to 7% of the total portfolio. That's it. And that really highlights its role perfectly. See, IBIT isn't the whole cake here. It's more like the high-octane icing. It's a strategic kicker designed to boost your returns, not to completely dominate your risk.
So how do you actually turn that growth into spendable cash? Well, there are 2 main disciplined methods. The first one is time-based. You sell a small, fixed percentage every quarter, but, and this is a big but, only if the price is above a certain level you've already decided on. The second way is triggered by rebalancing. Let's say your 5% IBIT allocation grows to 8%. Well, you sell that extra 3% to take profits and, just as importantly, bring your risk right back in line. The beauty is, both of these methods force you to sell high.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, shall we? Section 4 is all about managing volatility. Anyone, and I mean anyone who's even thinking about this strategy has to go in with their eyes wide open about Bitcoin's wild, crazy price swings.
So let's just stare at this number for a second. A drop of 80%. The most crucial point to get is that a drawdown of 50, 60, even 80%. That's not some crazy once-in-a-lifetime black swan event for Bitcoin. Historically, it's a normal, recurring part of its market cycle. You absolutely have to be prepared for this, not just financially, but emotionally.
So how do you possibly defend against something like that? Well, first, you keep a 6 to 12-month cash reserve for all your income needs. This is so important because it means you'll never be a forced seller during a deep crash. Second, you stick to your rules-based rebalancing plan like your life depends on it. And third, where it makes sense, you can use tax loss harvesting to offset gains you might have somewhere else. Discipline, my friends, is your shield.
And check this out. This brilliantly illustrates how resilient the strategy can be. In a bull case, right, IBIT grows 20% a year. Your portfolio is just crushing it. In a base case, 10% growth, it comfortably keeps up with your income needs. But look at the bear case. Even if IBIT has zero growth for 15 years, the strategy is designed so that the other 90-something% of your core portfolio still covers your needs. The IBIT part is basically what you'd call a free call option on some massive upside.
All right, let's bring it home. In our final section, the Total Return Toolkit, we're going to summarize the essential tools and, maybe more importantly, the mindsets you've got to have to make this work.
First up, what not to do. You got to avoid over-allocating because you have a fear of missing out. A 30% stake in this could wreck your whole plan. You have to avoid emotional, panic selling at all costs. Don't forget about fees and taxes. And finally, get rid of that all-or-nothing thinking. Remember, IBIT is just one component, it is not the entire plan.
You know, when it comes right down to it, success with a strategy like this, it's less about the spreadsheet and way more about your own behavioral discipline. The hardest part isn't the math. It's having the guts to stick to your rules when the market is screaming at you to do the exact opposite, whether that's out of sheer terror or pure greed.
So, why does any of this matter? Why go through all the trouble? Because this isn't just about chasing bigger returns. It's about building a more resilient portfolio for the future. You get a potential hedge against inflation, you get exposure to some massive upside, and maybe best of all, you get the freedom to engineer the exact income stream that you need.
This quote right here, it just says it all. IBIT is not some magic income machine that you just buy and forget about. It's a tool, a very powerful tool. And just like any powerful tool, it needs to be used wisely, it needs to be sized carefully, and you better believe it needs to be handled with a disciplined plan.
And that really leaves us with one final thought, a question for you to chew on. This strategy, it really represents a shift from being a passive consumer of financial products to becoming an active engineer of your own financial outcomes. So the question is, are you ready to make that shift?